Hi, and welcome to the show. Can you imagine seeing an overcrowded school bus? I couldn't. When I was on the bus, it wasn't that overcrowded. When I was on the city bus, it was crowded. We had to stand up and hold on to one of those things like you see on the subway. But did you know there are a few consequences for overcrowded school buses? Let's take a look. And want to point something out here before we play. On one of my couple last videos, someone commented like, "Why don't you just show us instead of being silent?" That's the whole reasoning for this. I have 10-foot chart. I have these Type-C chargers right here, and a tripod like this. But the thing is because it's like if I'm gonna start showing this to you, I gotta do this right in the living room instead of just in here. So that's the whole point here. And I don't want to go getting two chairs and using a ironing board for the TV. So let's take a look at this.
Action 7 News.
We were the first to show you these images of kids standing in the aisle and on the seats of a school bus. APS is now saying that what you see here is not an overcrowded bus, but rather undisciplined children.
Tonight, Target 7 investigates by going to the Public Education Department for answers. Here's John Cardinal. These parents say they were outraged when they saw their children coming off of packed buses on the first week of school.
This is ridiculous. These kids are sitting on top of the seats. Windows roll down. Someone's gonna fly out. Why can we not get another bus out here?
After our story aired showing these images, Target 7 did some digging. We wanted to know if there are laws that govern bus overcrowding. So we went to the state's Public Education Commission to find out.
There's a regulation that states if they're going to do 3-3 seating, which is three students to a seat, each student should have 13 inches of butt space, essentially.
That means buses like this can fit 71 elementary school children. Antonio Ortiz of the state's Public Education Department says larger children like junior high and high schoolers are required to have 15 inches of space, and typically about 48 can fit on a bus.
So there shouldn't be overcrowding. They should have a seating charts. In the districts should be providing the seating charts if they have those.
Yes, seats are assigned, but you see a lot of movement during the first week or so as everything is solidified.
APS spokeswoman Monica Armenta says after our story aired, the district contacted the company that owns the bus. The district contracts with 6 different bus companies to transport children back and forth to school. She says that they don't believe that particular bus was overcrowded. They have, however, acknowledged some of their buses are overcrowded.
That particular bus has had an issue with student discipline, and so students should never be standing or sitting any way on a bus other than what they are taught is protocol and safety.
So what are the consequences if a school district is not following state regulations?
That would be up to the school districts. I mean, they're responsible. Every school district has a transportation director and transportation staff. And so it would be up to the school district to make sure that they're following those laws.
We also reached out to the Albuquerque Police Department. In this email, they tell us there is no statute in the state's traffic laws to pull over a bus if it's overcrowded. However,
after we get off this interview, I'll be reaching out to the transportation director there at APS and just to discuss some of the issues, what they're dealing with.
We wanted to count how many students are going into the buses for ourselves. So Target 7 sent this drone above the school to see how many students are going onto the buses. This is one of the schools parents say had overcrowded buses. It has kids from 1st to 8th grade. Remember, about 48 to 71 kids can fit into a bus depending on the age of the child. Using our drone, we counted roughly 28 kids in this bus, 15 on this one, and 24 on another. Armenta said one of the reasons we didn't find packed buses is because for the past 2 weeks, the district has been working with its contractors to fix the overcrowding. They also changed routes and eliminated some stops for buses that were packed.
This isn't the situation anybody wants to be in, but in all fairness, it also isn't a situation that has quick answers. So we appreciate everyone's patience and want them to know that we really are trying.
Armenta says the problem APS is facing is a national one. School districts across the country are facing bus driver shortages. APS and its contractors have been offering to pay as much as $20 an hour to entice people to become drivers. Until they have enough drivers, it's all aboard as safely as they can. For Target 7, I'm John Cardinelli.
We also reach out to the National Association for Pupil Transportation. They say bus overcrowding has been a problem for years and want parents to contact their district with any concern.
Which is pretty good. So, if you see overcrowded buses like what happened 6 years ago, just let them know and they'll take care of it. Will Pat Burgess ever find out the truth, whether she's been doped or whether she's part of a satanic cult? When we come back, we're going to hear more from Pat Burgess. We're also going to hear from Dr. Bronwyn. Is he responsible for this, or is he trying to help her, or trying to overspend their insurance money by hooking them up on dope? Stay with us. Yesterday, we brought you the story of Pat Burgess, who has multiple personality disorder. It's a disorder to where you have multiple personalities. We focused on Dr. Bronwyn at Rush Presbyterian Hospital, who offered to help her in Chicago. But throughout the discoveries, Bronwyn discovered that she was part of a satanic cult. So far, what we learned is that the doctor asked one of her husband, Pat's husband, to bring back a hamburger sample, which didn't contain human blood, but the question still remains, what do we know more about Dr. Bronwyn? You're about to hear some startling accusations from the lawsuits that were being brought against him. Here again, Victoria Corderi.
In 1988, 2 years after Pat Burgess first entered Rush Presbyterian Hospital, Dr. Braun felt she finally could be trusted on the outside. Though her young children had to remain in the hospital, Pat was allowed to leave and continue treatment as an outpatient.
It was the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
What happened was a slow unraveling of everything Pat had been led to believe while she was in the hospital. She and her husband began to search for evidence of her family's involvement in the cult.
We made numerous trips back to Iowa,
To Des Moines, the supposed scene of most of her crimes.
looking for evidence, going to places where there were supposed to be bodies. The
Evidence that a ceremony had taken place, like what?
If I'd stumbled across an old bonfire, that probably would have done it. I was looking for anything.
And she found nothing. So for the first time, there were seeds of doubt in Pat's mind. If she committed hundreds of murders, why was there not one shred of proof?
What if this isn't real?
Pat then began to wonder about the effects of the many drugs Dr. Braun was giving her, especially the high experimental doses of the heart medication Inderal. She was stunned to learn that her dosage, which on many days could be 1,200 milligrams, was 4 times the normal dose. Pat decided to quit cold turkey.
He had literally made me addicted to the Xanax, the Halcyon, and the chest pains and stuff were just so horrible coming off the Inderal.
And once Pat cleared drugs from her body, she found her mind becoming clearer as well, and more questions arose.
I said, I think these were just hallucinations.
So you were starting to rebel.
If thinking in this therapy is rebelling, then that's what I was starting to do.
And Pat started to believe Dr. Braun was using her devout faith against her whenever she questioned her memories.
If I believed in God, and I had no proof of his existence, and nothing tangible that I could touch, then I had to believe that this was real, even though I couldn't see it or touch it or have any evidence of it.
And now, out of the hospital and free of drugs, Pat began to rethink everything that had happened to her during her treatment with Dr. Braun. Remember the court testimony in which Dr. Braun offered proof that Pat's son John had helped to disembowel a human being?
I had one child who was just 5 years old talk to me about what it's like to
knife in somebody's abdomen and pull it down, and how the intestines pop out. I mean, they just blow out. And what it smells like.
Pat realized the story sounded too familiar. Certainly a memory, but not quite what Dr. Braun had in mind.
I told him that that was a scene out of Star Wars.
I thought they smelled bad on the outside.
So now, as Pat regained her mind, she and Mike became determined to regain their children, who by now had been in the hospital for nearly 3 years. They ultimately had to go to court to get John and Mike released from Rush. Experts say theirs are 2 of the longest stays for such young children in a psychiatric unit.
We had our freedom, but we still didn't have our minds back.
By the early 90s, Pat and Mike had finally come to believe that everything, Pat's treatment, the kids' treatment, the entire 3-year-long hospitalization under the care of Dr. Bennett Braun, had been a sham. They filed suit against both hospital and doctor for allowing this bizarre therapy to take place, and they say nearly destroy their family.
Everything about our memories, everything about our real lives was contaminated.
Pat is typical of innumerable people who wind up being the targets of this therapy.
Dr. Richard Offshay is a noted critic of the diagnosis of multiple personality disorder. He was a paid expert who worked on Pat's case.
How did something like this happen?
It's happening all over the country, in major cities all over the country.
Dr. Offshay says a true diagnosis of multiple personality disorder is exceedingly rare, yet it became accepted and even fashionable in the mid-'80s. But it's always been controversial. It certainly was in Pat's case. This letter to Dr. Braun's associate from Pat's former therapist in Des Moines says 6 other doctors disputed Pat's diagnosis. Offshay says Dr. Braun was one of many therapists who bought into the diagnosis and applied it to vulnerable, depressed patients who believed in them.
You can get somebody to believe just about anything you want them to believe about themselves and their histories arising from this.
You mean because of the power of the therapist?
The influence power of the therapist. It's enormous. Pat was also subjected to a drug regimen, which, if anything, is going to make her decision-making deteriorate.
And then, Offshay says, another factor fueled the explosion of the multiple personality disorder diagnosis. Insurance paid for the treatments.
They were, in many ways, simply ways to vacuum down to nothing people's insurance policies.
You're making it sound like it's a huge financial scam.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Sometimes, when you get paid a lot for doing something, it looks more attractive. One of the things that would contribute to the popularization of any new diagnosis is whether or not you can get paid for treating it.
And in the case of the Burgess family, their insurance paid out almost $3 million to Dr. Braun and Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center. Each patient had $1 million cap on their policies, and in each case, that limit was nearly reached. But was it money that propelled this nightmarish treatment? Just misguided bad medicine. Whatever it was, Pat was not alone in her ordeal. Dateline has discovered a total of 11 lawsuits against Dr. Bennett Braun, all alleging that he planted false memories of satanic abuse in various patients in the dissociative disorders unit. The allegations are eerily similar. One patient says she was told she was a participant in satanic cult activity. Another says her mother was named as the leader of a 5-state regional cult. And still another claims she was heavily medicated, then led to believe she drank blood and ate human sacrifices. So as what appears to be a house of cards begins to fall, what are the man and the hospital at the center of the firestorm?
Do you think now, looking back, that you got carried away with this and you spent too much time focusing on these so-called memories of all this satanic cult stuff?
Objection.
We'll hear what Dr. Braun has to say as Victoria Guderi continues Devil's Advocate. Stay with us. As you just heard, Pat Burgess is now cured. But the insurance money has gone up through the roof of $1 million each. So what does Dr. Braun have to say? We're not going to hear the other side of the story. Once again, here's Victoria Guderi.
I want to know why no one stopped this Why was it allowed to go on?
So why was it allowed to go on? Who was watching what was happening at one of Chicago's premier hospitals? Not just to Pat, but to so many other patients. We wanted to talk with Dr. Braun, who agreed to an interview only if Pat Burgess signed a release allowing him to discuss her case. She did sign a release, but then Dr. Braun still declined an interview because of all of the other lawsuits pending against him.
Would you like me to swear it in?
Sure.
But he did give his side in this videotaped deposition in the lawsuit of Pat Burgess and her family.
I do. I have to work with the patient with what they are telling me. My opinion is that she gave me sufficient data to accept that there was a possibility of this being true.
Dr. Braun repeatedly insists that he was only reacting to the stories Pat was telling him, and that he was duty-bound as her psychiatrist to investigate them.
And you believe those statements to be plausible, isn't that right?
Plausible, yes.
During the 10-day deposition, Dr. Braun often chuckles, smirks, shrugs, or is generally dismissive of the questions. He reviews some of his entries from Pat's medical records.
Is there a sentence there that reads, this memory came back Saturday and caused her to vomit?
That is correct.
Does that say memory there, Dr. Braun?
That's the word.
Does it say fantasy?
No, sir.
Does it say nightmare?
I'll probably say no to the rest of the things you're listing.
Does it say belief?
No.
Does it say delusion?
No.
Okay. Does it say alleged memory?
No.
And what about the hospital where Dr. Braun worked? Was anyone at Rush Presbyterian overseeing Dr. Braun's practices, his hypnosis, his drug therapies, his unorthodox care?
I knew, of course, that it was highly controversial. I knew that there were no standards for treatment for it.
Dr. Jan Fawcett is the head of psychiatry at Rush Presbyterian. He allowed Dr. Braun to start his program and was supposed to oversee it.
Was there anything written about what was planned for this unit, exactly what kind of therapies, what kind of medications were being used?
No, there were no specific plans, and in most cases, those aren't necessary.
Why not?
Well, why would you need that if you trust the person who's doing it?
But what about the letter from Pat's Des Moines therapist that said 6 psychiatrists disputed Pat's diagnosis of multiple personality disorder?
This letter suggests to me that red flags should have been flying, that there was so much disagreement over her diagnosis.
That also means that she had consulted 6 different psychiatrists in 3 different hospitals and was not well, doesn't it?
So Rush Presbyterian accepted the diagnosis, but had no written plans about how the unit would run, under what guidelines, and no specific rules governing the use of hypnosis.
The AMA has made it clear in 1985 that hypnosis is likely to produce false memories and needed to be used judiciously.
Well, my understanding is that the false memories were there when she came in.
Dr. Braun does admit in his deposition that he was the first person Pat talked to about her satanic memories.
You were the first one that she talked to about satanic cults, is that correct?
That's correct. I think the real question is that her fantasy or is that reality? And I encouraged him to explore that.
But Dr. Braun believed in a cult conspiracy before he ever met Pat Burgess.
There are writings to that effect about the satanic cult and cannibalism. Were you aware of those writings?
I was aware of some of them. I thought they were a little exaggerated.
But you thought they were exaggerated? Yet this is the man that you let start this unit?
Just because he had certain ideas that I thought should be checked out doesn't mean he shouldn't start a unit.
But what if Pat Burgess had no idea that she was in fact a guinea pig for this new hypnosis and drug treatment?
Did you get written informed consent from Mrs. Burgess before proceeding with hypnosis with her?
No.
And Dr. Braun says he didn't need consent to prescribe the mind-altering drugs and the mega doses of the heart medication Inderal.
It is an approved practice and FDA allowed to do off-label use of medication. Therefore, it was approved at Rush.
The hospital says it was satisfied Dr. Braun at least discussed the treatment with Pat, and that informed consent was not needed to approve the large doses of mind-altering drugs.
What's the danger?
It's completely untested at such a high level.
And what if it's well supervised and the patient's monitored very carefully?
Well, how well supervised was it? You really didn't even know
no chart
what was
notes?
going. Look, copious chart notes seen by no one but Dr. Braun. You didn't look at them. Did you?
Did I look at them regularly?
At
No.
the notes.
No.
And what about one of the most incredible chapters of this saga? that Dr. Braun actually used the laboratory of a major urban hospital to test meat to see if it contained human flesh.
Mrs. Burgess told me that her father ground up human remains and asked a hamburger and put them in meatloaf.
And you found that to be a plausible statement?
Someone could certainly do that. Hospital grind up meat, make meatloaf, whether it's a lamb or turkey or cow or person.
Has there ever been a documented report in the United States criminal history or mental health history, to your knowledge, that somebody ground up a relative into meatloaf?
No, not that I know of.
We can't ignore what our patients tell us. I mean, I had John Wayne Gacy tell me about 33 bodies buried under his house and how he sexually tortured the children to death. That's pretty wild too, but the bodies are there in that case, right? We hear pretty lurid stuff, and you don't just dismiss it because it's lurid.
Dr. Fawcett says he didn't know about the meat incident at the time, nor did he know that Dr. Braun had called in the FBI to investigate Pat's claims. In both cases, he says he became aware after the fact.
I'm not saying that I agreed with the degree to which Dr. Braun embraced these ideas. I think as he heard them more and more, I think he embraced them more and more. I didn't agree with that because I felt evidence should have been forthcoming, and I told him that.
Dr. Fawcett says he also was unaware that Dr. Braun had brought guns and handcuffs into therapy sessions with Pat and her children.
I wasn't aware of handcuffs with Pat, I'm sorry. I was not aware of that.
You know, Doctor, on the face of this, it just seems that you weren't aware of a lot of things, and the hospital wasn't aware of a lot of things.
I was aware of the general tenor of treatment. There's 1,500 admissions going on in this hospital every year. Over 30, 40 doctors treating patients on the unit.
But if not,
I can't know every nuance of every treatment that's happening behind closed doors. I can't know that. And I knew that Dr. Braun was committed to helping her.
Dr. Fawcett denies that insurance money and the profitability of the unit kept the hospital from taking action.
We get the most severely ill patients with very complicated illnesses here. And the treatments required for some of these patients aren't always conventional treatments. And non-conventional treatments are areas of disagreement.
In the end, the hospital's head of psychiatry, Dr. Braun's boss, says Dr. Braun did help Pat Burgess. And the evidence is that she is now able to live with family and function in society.
I would remind you that Mrs. Burgess has had a very good outcome to her treatment. I think she's got her life, the life of her children, maybe the life of her husband.
The way she got that life was getting off the drugs and looking for evidence and realizing that none of this had actually happened.
At some point in treatment, everybody comes to question different symptoms they've had.
You say she got better, okay, and then she started disbelieving all these things. If Dr. Braun went right on believing them, so what does that say? Who's sick here?
Well, I don't think that's a sign of an illness. I don't think it. I think that Dr. Braun's beliefs are another matter.
And you don't think his beliefs are deleterious enough to warrant looking into whether he should be working at this hospital or working as a psychiatrist at all?
I've considered whether he should be working at this hospital, and I've decided he didn't do anything that wrong, and that he actually gave his patient good care. He was there for her. There's no damages.
Except that last November, Rush Presbyterian Hospital, Dr. Braun, and a psychiatrist for the children settled the Burgess lawsuit. They admitted no wrongdoing, but the hospital and the doctor's insurance companies paid Pat and her family a total of $10.6 million to keep the case from going to court. Pat Burgess and her family had a victory of sorts, but no amount of money could help them with what they had left to endure.
When we return, Pat Burgess reunites with her children. Will they remember? Victoria Derrick includes Devil's Advocate. Stay with us. Now the conclusion to our story. You've heard what Dr. Braun had to say about the Pat Burgess case. You've heard what Pat Burgess has to say about, you've heard what the doctor of Rush Presbyterian Hospital has to say. You've heard all sides of the story. But now we're gonna hear about what Pat's gonna do. Will she ever get her children back after all these years? As Victoria Derrick continues, you will witness what's been going on all those years in that hospital.
Where would Pat be without this unit?
I wouldn't be alive.
Today, when Pat Burgess watches the local TV news series that packaged her as a victim of multiple personality disorder, she sees herself in an entirely new light.
You are very convincing in these various personalities. Somebody watching would say, well, why would I believe her now? Who's the real Pat? The Pat in there? This Pat here? What do you say to that? I say what you're seeing there is someone who's very drugged and hypnotized and being controlled by someone who has to profit from it.
Pat Burgess is still trying to clear out the emotional wreckage from the years she and her two sons spent at Rush Presbyterian Hospital in the care of Dr. Bennett Braun. It took more than 8 years for Pat to reconcile with her parents, whom she had accused of sexually abusing her and forcing her into the cult.
My parents aged so much through this. They went through so much.
The first meetings were tentative. The little boys Pat's parents knew from before had turned into young men. Still, Pat's mother eventually found forgiveness and was able to close what was one of the most painful chapters of her life.
What has this whole episode done to your relationship?
Now that it finally has been healed, well, if anything, it's made it more precious.
Pat says her relationship with her husband suffered as well. Mike did stick by his family through their years in the hospital, but in the end, he never stepped in to rescue them.
She was hypnotized and on drugs. But how could you let this happen? You weren't on drugs.
I wasn't on drugs. I wasn't hypnotized. The only people I had to rely on was the doctors and the staff at the hospital.
But what was coming out of the hospital was so seemingly unbelievable.
But Patty and the kids weren't the only people saying this. There were other patients that were saying the same things.
Do you bear any responsibility, do you think?
I don't know about responsibility, but I feel a lot of guilt.
For 3 years, Pat and Mike's little boys had known no other home than the hospital.
They had to learn to be outside. They had to learn to be in the world.
Today, more than a decade since they first came to Rush Presbyterian, they are teenagers bearing deep emotional scars. They were behind in school and required special tutors and a child psychiatrist to help them. They did not want to be interviewed, but at their mother's suggestion, returned to the hospital grounds.
I can remember each and every hallway, what the rooms looked like.
Well, that was your home for years, that's why.
I used to have nightmares about being in that hospital. I used to wake up just terrified, not being able to control myself, trying to get out of wherever I was.
Remember when you went around the track, when we'd kick you out?
Yeah, I remember that. I always wanted to run away off the track and just never come back.
They were able to discard part of this as a kid discards a fantasy about the tooth fairy. But other parts were harder to let go of. Are they still letting go? I think they're to the point where they're trying to be normal kids. I'm tremendously proud of them. They have been able to go through this and become the people that they have become.
Now the family hopes it has a new lease on a more stable future. But still, Pat lives with the fact that Dr. Bennett Braun is still practicing psychiatry at Rush, although the hospital has closed down his clinic.
If you wanted to hold Dr. Braun accountable for all of this, why did you choose to settle? I fought fiercely in the settlement not to have a gag order. I would not take this money in exchange for keeping quiet.
Now it is Pat who is spreading the word to anyone who will listen. Not about the satanic cult she once believed in, but about the cult-like existence Dr. Braun created within the walls of this hospital. She does it, she says, to ensure that it never happens again.
Why do you think we survive? I think sometimes all you have is love and faith and hope. And our love was never in question. Our faith wasn't in question, and we just had to hope that God would get us through this.
Based on Dr. Braun's treatment of Pat Burgess and her children, the state of Illinois has brought formal charges against him in an effort to revoke his medical license. Dr. Braun has moved to dismiss the complaint. And ironically, questions are now being raised about the case that first brought multiple personality disorder to the public's attention, Sybil. As I mentioned earlier, she became the subject of a best-selling book and a popular TV movie. Well, recently, one of her psychiatrists and a psychologist who has closely studied her case suggested that Sybil herself may have been the victim of suggestion. In other words, her many personalities may have also been manufactured by a doctor.
Which was an expert on this case. So really, I'm really glad that this all has been settled out. Settlements, insurance money through the roof, $1 million. Where would you go wrong? Clearly not this way. Can you ever imagine being fired for racially discriminating your customers? Coming up next, Denny's will embark on a journey that will help out employees by not racially discriminate other employees. You're about to enter racial sensitivity training. Stay with us. If you mention Denny's, 3 things come to mind. An inexhaustible breakfast called the Grand Slam. One of the restaurant's problems with their with their food safety issues, which we were talking about last season. An issue's always going on called racism. Denny's minority customers complained that they were asked to show identification, pay meals in advance, and they were being racially discriminated. Well, now, after all those lawsuits, years ago, Denny's embarked on a racial sensitivity training for all managers. You're about to visit one of those seminars and hear what all the customers have to say and what the former CEO of Burger King said when he took on this journey. Here's Leslie Stahl.
Good morning. Good morning. Good, thank you. Welcome to the We Can Too workshop.
Karen Reagan and Andre Clark are training these 17 Denny's managers on how to avoid offending minority customers.
Do not touch them. Do not follow them out of the building. Do not use profanity or racial slurs, and do not question somebody's immigration status.
They let us sit in on a day-long racial sensitivity seminar that managers at all 1,652 Denny's restaurants must take to make sure they and their staffs treat minority customers like everyone else. One of the racial stereotypes at Denny's was that black customers don't tip. The group was shown this demonstration video.
I'm real sorry, but I do have other customers, and they tip.
I think you better get your manager over here, and I do mean now.
As part of learning how to deal with discrimination, the managers were asked to role-play the situation they just saw in the video. One played the concerned manager, the other the customer who was just insulted by a waitress.
She said, I'm not waiting on you all don't tip. That means she's discriminating against me. She got a problem with black people.
I'm glad you alerted me to the situation, and our policy is not to discriminate. We have a no-tolerance policy.
Well, she need not to be working here. I need to fire her. Something.
And I will take care of the situation. I'm very sorry, ma'am, if this ever happened.
This unprecedented training grew out of 2 separate class action lawsuits that earned Denny's its reputation about race. The one that got the most attention happened in 1993 when a group of President Clinton's Secret Service agents couldn't get served at the Denny's in Annapolis, Maryland.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Relman.
John Relman, an attorney with the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, represented the Secret Service agents when they sued Denny's.
In the hour that they were there, the 6 African-American officers could not get served breakfast, while the white officers sitting in the same area of the restaurant, served by the same waitresses, received not only 1 helping, but seconds and thirds in some cases. They are trusted with the leader of the free world, and Denny's, of all places, will not serve them breakfast.
If you wanted to set up a classic situation to prove whether a business was discriminating, this is what you would set up.
We couldn't have dreamed up a better scenario.
A scenario so good that Relman soon expanded the complaint into a class action suit representing customers in 49 states. You started hearing from other people, right?
We did. It was an explosion.
One of the things I've heard, tell me if it's true, is that the stereotypes about black customers were so embedded
that even black waiters and black managers were in some cases discriminating. Is that true?
Yeah.
Marcus Diggs is a Denny's manager in training.
Young black kids come in, and already their perception is they're not going to leave a tip. They just not going to leave a tip.
Even a black waiter thinks that.
Right.
Rather than go to trial, Denny's settled the lawsuits in 1994, agreeing to pay $46 million to almost 300,000 customers.
Did every single one of those people suffer discrimination? Probably not. But what the company was saying was, we want to settle this, and we want to put this behind us. We don't want to keep getting hit with lawsuits. We want to move on.
Moving on meant hiring a new CEO. They got Jim Adamson from Burger King, where he had turned that company around financially and was known in the restaurant business as someone who had no tolerance for discrimination.
This train is going one way. We're going to treat each other with dignity. If you don't like the way the train's going, get off.
That's the first thing he told his staff when he joined the troubled company in 1995.
If you discriminate, I'm going to fire you. This train
was
is going...
basically hello.
It was hello.
I'll fire you if you discriminate. Tough.
It needed to be. I set the values in this company, in the culture in this company, and I think it needed to be awakened.
Did you fire people?
We have fired people for discriminating.
There was apparently an attitude at Denny's that blacks were bad for business.
To say blacks are bad for business is almost, I can't even think that thought. So if it was here, it was probably one of the dumbest things I've ever heard.
Blacks are bad for business? That's a racist statement right there. I mean, no, I'm not even going to go there. I said at the beginning I would not deal with the issue of racism, but this is just getting way out of hand with Denny's. With the Grand Slam, food safety issues. Because let me tell you something. As a fast food employee, if I saw one of my employees discriminate, I would get that damn thing on videotape, show it to my boss, and bam, they would take care of it right away.
Dumb, but pervasive. Denny's was almost a breeding ground for racial problems. Open 24 hours, it attracts customers looking for inexpensive meals and expecting top-rate service.
It's a prescription for disaster when you have an untrained workforce that's at this lower end and is suddenly now being put in a situation where you're asking them to serve people.
That's why every one of the 70,000 employees at Denny's must go through the racial sensitivity course, where one of the lessons is that if a customer believes he was discriminated against, the best approach is not to argue, but to apologize.
And when you talk about someone who said, I am being discriminated against in your restaurant, you've got to take the time and make sure everything you do is presenting a message that says, I am very sorry this happened to you in our restaurants. And I just want you to know we don't really go for that at all. And I want to do what I can to make this right for you.
What are the other specifics that they're told in the training?
It's all from, when you seat an African-American, this is almost silly to say, but don't put them in the back of the restaurant if there's room, somewhere else where everybody else is seating. Don't sit African-Americans at a dirty table and sit white people at a clean table.
You have to train someone to do that?
Unfortunately.
And you, ma'am? At this Denny's in Waldorf, Maryland, Joan Barner is known as Mom to her customers, who on this day included me and associate producer Michelle Webb. Joan showed us what she learned in sensitivity training about how the simple act of putting a plate down could be misinterpreted.
So you take that plate, and you have to be conscientious, setting that plate directly in front of you, gently. Because if I throw this plate off of balance, and I bounce it off that table, it looks like I just don't want to be bothered. I've tossed my food at you.
See, I would say, oh, she's having a bad day, and why am I putting up with this? And you would say,
she doesn't want to serve me because I'm black.
And you would say that. I would do that. Joan even learned that the way you hand change to a customer can offend.
Here's your change. 3 into your hand. That's 4, and that's 5.
And you put it right in my hand.
Right into your hand.
And why did you do that?
So that no one takes offense that you didn't want to touch them.
And I never knew that. I never knew that just not touching somebody's hand, they might take that as discrimination. I don't want to touch them. In my mind, it was that I didn't want to offend them and rub my germs on them, but that's not what it was.
Troy's job, Joan's job, every job at Denny's is regulated by this 85-page consent decree, a legal document Denny's signed when it settled the big class action lawsuits. The consent decree defines every aspect of life at Denny's, how all the restaurants must operate, how customers must be treated. And this sign must be posted at every Denny's restaurant. It says they will not discriminate, and there's an 800 number for customers with grievances to call the Office of the Civil Rights Monitor to complain. The Civil Rights Monitor also organizes secret drop-in spot checking of restaurants.
African American and white testers are sent out undercover randomly to restaurants, and also to restaurants where there's an indication of a problem, to see how people are being treated. And that's unique. That's never been done before. In the first year of the decree, there were 650 tests that were run.
The results of the tests are sealed, but spot checking continues.
It's Big Brother. You have someone surveying them every minute they're on the job. At least they feel that.
Absolutely. And there is that feeling of Big Brother, but what we're trying to do is train them, enlighten them, that not only are they going to be better at serving the customer at the restaurants, they're going to be better in the communities they live.
As part of the training, Denny's managers are shown an ABC Primetime Live report about a black man who was discriminated against repeatedly.
Watching this video along with, people of other origins and ethnic backgrounds, we have Hispanic, we have Oriental, we also have colored here as well. It's like, man, I feel, it's like if I tried to put myself in their shoes, I would be very, very mad. I would be angry at white people.
How many of you, when Rush used the term colored?
Sorry.
No, seriously. It's okay. How many of you, when he used the term colored, said, ouch?
Yeah, right. It's done.
Yeah.
Now, that's a learning for both sides.
It's interesting that he didn't mention the word Oriental, which is offensive to Asians. Denny's racial problems went beyond clashes at the restaurants. When Ray Hood Phillips was hired after the consent decree to set up a diversity program, she discovered that she was one of the very few blacks in the executive suite.
Black senior managers when you got here, how many?
Denny's one.
Black franchise owners?
There's one African American.
Black advertising firms?
None.
Black law firms?
None.
Black suppliers?
None.
Did you think when you looked at that and you arrived here that this was a racist company?
I wouldn't have wanted to work here.
She searched the country for new hires, and today, it's fair to say, Denny's has a new complexion.
25% of Denny's senior managers are minority. 20% are African American.
And that's just in 3 years?
That's in 3 years.
There are now many minority board members, suppliers, and franchise owners. And who'd have thought that just 3 years after the Secret Service agent sued Denny's, that the NAACP would be making the CEO of Denny's their Man of the Year?
We're a good company today.
Yeah, but you did have to be forced.
We had to be forced. I wasn't here, but yes, we had to be forced. There's a lot of companies that could be forced to do this. We got forced, but look at where we are today, Leslie.
Where are you?
I would say in the scale, we're in the turning side of this. We are not finished by any means.
We're doing everything humanly possible. There is no company in the United States of America who is more on the point on this issue than Denny's.
Exactly. I'll be right back. Coming up with GMB Monday, they're the unseen. A little known fact of life here in America. Children working hard for low pay, struggling to help their families survive. Illegal backbreaking work. We're going to follow one family in Texas going from the elements to the unknown. How could this still be happening? Children of the harvest. That's on Monday. That's giving me a break for this Saturday going to Sunday. I'll see you again for Give Me a Break Monday. I hope you've had a great day and not being racially discriminated against. For all of us here, give me a break. Good night, everyone.